Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the TRSO webinar series. My name is Tony Leong, and today I'll be presenting on the Treasury SharePoint platform known as ALEX. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that a recording of the session is being made, and we'll have it available on the TRSO website for later viewing. I do encourage questions about the presentation of ALEX, but I do ask that folks please hold their questions until the end, at which time we'll unmute the lines. At that point, participants can ask their questions verbally or through the chat window. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. In the meeting invitation itself, you'll find a copy of the PDF presentation, but you can also follow along via the webinar link. So today, I'll cover what is ALEX. I'll give you a little bit of context in terms of what that system represents, the types of information that ALEX houses. We'll also touch a little bit on the Fiscal Service email and instant messaging policy that was recently announced and became effective. We'll also talk in depth and in detail about requesting and validating access to ALEX, so I'll go through the steps required for that. And then we'll finish with known issues as well as next steps. All right, so what is ALEX? ALEX is the Fiscal Service SharePoint platform that Fiscal Service uses for collaboration and enterprise content management. And ALEX refers generically to their main intranet site. It provides read-only information about the Bureau itself, about the various AC areas, also known as the offices. It provides information about the vision for the organization, tactical plans, and in many cases, organizational charts. ALEX also holds the Fiscal Service phone book. So each of the AC areas has a page that's hosted in ALEX, and on this slide, you can see from the graphic on the left-hand side here, we're showing a sample of the page that's dedicated to the debt management services. And so on there, we'll see some words from Assistant Commissioner Jeff Schramek. There's some links that'll take you as well to their tactical plan as well as their org chart, other information pertinent to that particular AC area. So a lot of really good information that exists on ALEX, and a lot of the information is publicly available. I did also want to note that ALEX is really kind of a general platform, and this landing page that we're looking at is where you come when you initially get into ALEX, but each of the AC areas also maintains separate subsites that actually extend from ALEX, and so these are AC-specific areas that actually have a little bit more security applied to them. So, and access basically into those areas can only be obtained by making a specific request, and we'll go into those steps and how to make that request. So some AC areas choose to make information about their organization. So, for example, the technical plans, the org charts, make them publicly available directly on ALEX. Others actually embed them a little bit deeper into their subsites. So the Fiscal Service email instant messaging policy became effective August the 1st of this month, and basically the policy itself states that SBU High material can no longer be sent or received via the Fiscal Service email and instant messaging platforms, and that applies to their current Lotus Notes system as well as their future Office 365 system that they're migrating to this year. One thing to note, though, is it only applies to Fiscal Service systems. So if you happen to be sending SBU High between collaborators within the FRB, this policy does not apply. If you need to send SBU High information to individuals, for example, at Main Treasury, again, this policy does not apply. SBU High, as defined by Fiscal Service, is anything that can severely or catastrophically affect the national interest or the conduct of federal programs. In this case, anything that would hinder the Bureau's ability to complete its mission qualifies for SBU High. Now, in discussions with Fiscal Service, what they've noted is that in their minds, the scope of SBU High is actually relatively limited, so there is not a lot of material that really kind of falls into that category. And we've actually worked with Stacy Cahill, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for Fiscal Service, to develop what's called the Fiscal SBU High Guidance document, which supplements the policy and can be found on the TRSO website. On this slide, you'll see a couple of the first pages of that guidance document itself, but it goes into some detail to explain what SBU High is and provides some examples of what that represents. And again, we were able to host a separate session with Stacy Cahill specifically about the policy itself. She answered a number of questions in that regard, and recordings of that presentation in July, as well as her PowerPoint, can be found on the TRSO website. So requesting and validating access to ALEX is multi-step. And so what we've done is within the TRSO, we've worked with a number of teams within Fiscal Service to capture the steps needed in order to get that ALEX. And we compiled a document that we called the Getting Started document. So you see a couple of pages from that document, screenshots here. It walks you through the various steps, and we will go through that in the following slides. What I wanted to point out here was that at each step, we've also taken some time to also indicate, if you run into issues, if you have certain questions, who the appropriate party might be to contact. So as we kind of step through, each of the 8 steps here, you'll notice that we have a color coding. We've got green and blue. Green represents that the area of support would come from the Federal Reserve. And then blue are areas where if you run into difficulties, have questions, Fiscal Service would be the appropriate area to contact. All right, so we'll start with step 1. So step 1 really is obtaining a PIV-I credential. So for those of you that already have a PIV-I credential, obviously you can skip this step. Those who don't, we suggest that you start with a review of the information that's provided on the PIV-I credentialing service website, and that's the first URL that's on this slide. On that site, you'll actually find very good instructions for how to obtain a PIV-I credential, the types of I-9 documentation that you would need to bring as part of the identity proofing process, and then information about scheduling, how to obtain credential issuance through your local law enforcement unit. So again, we suggest folks start there. And on that site, you'll also see the request form itself for requesting PIV-I. Now, many folks who request PIV-I are individuals that are working in support of applications, applications in the TWA, for example, like pay.gov or ASAP. If that's the case, as you're filling out the PIV-I credential request form, then you'll indicate under application requirement your particular application in those drop-downs. Now, in some cases, individuals may not be associated with one application in particular, in which case the screenshot that you see here shows the options that you would select in the drop-downs for ALEX-only access. I will want to note on the same credentialing service website, besides the ability to request the credential, you'll also see a link that will take you to a request to order what's called the SecuGen reader. And that is the external card reader as well as biometric fingerprint reading device that plugs in via USB. It's recommended that you order a SecuGen card reader, although many of the HP laptops come with a built-in card reader. You'll find that will work as well, but the SecuGen provides a fingerprint reading device that will allow a reset of the PIV-I PIN. So step 2, once you have the PIV-I credential, the next step really is to make sure that it validates appropriately with Fiscal Service. And to do that, you would insert your card into the appropriate reader and bring up your browser, navigate to the piv.treasury.gov site. At that point, a pop-up from Windows Security will appear listing all of the certificates available on your PIV-I credential. For most individuals, there will be 2 certificates available, one for client authentication and the other for document signing. The certificate that you would want to use to access ALEX is the one appropriate for client authentication. And so in order to check that, as you'll notice in this screenshot, when you select a certificate, you'll notice that there is a link that says click here for more information about the certificate itself. And once you do that, you can look into the certificate details. As you scroll through the values under security certificate details, you're going to want to look for a particular key called enhanced key usage, and there you'll be able to confirm whether or not it says client authentication. Once you've successfully selected the appropriate certificate and then provided your PIN, you should be able to be redirected to the single sign-on screen that shows certificate authentication success. And so it validates your cipher, the protocol that you're coming in on, and it validates other aspects basically of the communication and security. If you're not having success for that, the Fiscal Service Help Desk is a good place to kind of start with that troubleshooting. All right, and then after step 2, we'll move on to installing the F5 Big IP VPN client. Note, although we've started with the first 2 steps, steps 1, 2, and 3 can kind of be done in parallel. So as you're waiting, for example, for your PIV-I appointment to be scheduled with local law enforcement, you could also be working with your local IT folks to install the client itself. The client is what's called non-standard software, so there is not currently an installation package for it. You'll need to work with your local ITS team to install it from Treasury's website, and the URL is provided there for you in the instructions. The other thing as well to note is currently the Fiscal Service licenses allow for FRB usage, so there is no purchasing or any costs basically associated with this usage. Once you are able to go to the elogin.treasury.gov site to pull down the software, you're going to want to select FRB in the dropdown in terms of the agency. At that point, you'll be prompted again to select the appropriate PIV-I certificate. And once you provide your PIN, you'll be given the opportunity to click on the F5 Edge client win to begin the download. So once you've completed the download and the VPN client is successfully installed to your machine, we'll move on to step 4, which is obtaining the Fiscal Service ID. The Fiscal Service ID is also known as the Enterprise ID at times. It's also known as the Single Sign-On ID. But ultimately, this Fiscal Service ID is what uniquely identifies you on the Fiscal Service network. And oftentimes, individuals will request a Fiscal Service ID through the application request process. So, folks who need a PIV-I credential typically need it in support of a certain application. They might need to log into the TWA in some sort of support manner. In this case, provided a sample of what the CARS application uses. And so here to the right, you'll see an image of the CARS enrollment form, which after you fill this out and turn it back in to CBAF and the appropriate folks, an identity would be created for you via ITIM, the IBM Tivoli Identity Manager that maintains the provisioning process on the Fiscal Service side. If, however, you are not associated with an application and don't anticipate using this credential for application access or into one of the fiscal environments or TWA, then you'll need to self-register. And you can do that through the Fiscal Service CAS system. The URL is given there. When you bring up that URL, you're going to be directed to a Fiscal Service site. You'll be provided 2 links. You'll click on the first link, which says, I do not have a Fiscal Service SSO account, and you'll fill in the appropriate demographic information, so first name, last name, email address, and so forth. And once you've successfully submitted the form, you're going to receive an email with your Fiscal Service single sign-on ID, and then in a separate email, you'll receive a temporary password and then a link that'll take you to ITIM to set it to a permanent password. All right, moving on to step 5. once you have that Fiscal Service ID, then it's time to link it with your PIV-I credential. And again, you'll do that through the Fiscal Service CAS system. So you head back to that same URL, and this time you'll click on the second link to do that linking. You'll enter in your user ID, and that user ID corresponds to your Fiscal Service ID. You'll provide the password. You'll hit submit, and then if you're successful, you'll get that pop-up, which will inform you that within 24 hours, you'll get an email from the Fiscal Service System indicating that the ID has been successfully linked to your PIV-I. All right, step 6 takes us through to registering with your Fiscal Service ID to TEDS. TED stands for Treasury Enterprise Directory Service, and it is a system that's maintained by Main Treasury. So it's very similar to the ALEX platform, which in itself, although used by Fiscal Service, is actually hosted over at Main Treasury. Right now, registration to TEDS is a manual process, but Main Treasury is working on some automation in the form of a self-registration page. So, but at the moment, in order to register your ID into TEDS, you're going to need to send an email to 2 individuals, both of them at Main Treasury. One is Richard Casal, and the other individual is Roger Michaud. And what you'll need to send them is the information that is contained in that table. So first name, middle initial, last name, your title, phone number, email, location, and then finally your Fiscal Service ID. If you find that within your particular department or your particular unit there are a number of individuals like yourself that's also requesting registration into TEDS because you would all like to access ALEX, then it is permissible, in fact, it's encouraged for you to bundle that registration request into a spreadsheet. So that spreadsheet would contain, many names, and then send that to Roger and to Richard, and that would actually help expedite having this entry created. All right, so once you've completed steps 1 through 6 and you get an email back indicating that you have successfully registered in TEDS, it's time to move to step 7. All right, and at step 7, we're going to walk through configuring your F5 Big IP client and then walking through the steps of validating your access finally to ALEX. So you'll start with your PIV-I card in your reader. You'll launch your F5 Big IP client, and you'll see here on the left an image of the Big IP client itself. It begins in a disconnected status, and once you see the pop-up from the application itself, you're going to want to click on the lower left-hand corner, the Change Server button, and you're going to assign a value. That URL, https e-login.treasury.gov/FRB. That's actually the VPN server location. And once you've put that in, you're going to hit connect. And then what you're going to find is in about a minute or so, your machine will have navigated and negotiated a connection through to the Fiscal Service environment. And if everything goes well, you're going to see a connected status. And that's what you see over in the graphic on the right, and you'll see, the number of packets that have been sent and received. If you click on the View Details button, you could see more about the connection itself, the IP address, for example, that's been assigned to you. That might be useful later for diagnostic if there are issues. You'll also see, again, kind of the various ciphers and cipher strength that's being used in that connection. So if you've gotten this far and you're able to see connected on the Big IP Edge client, this means you've successfully VPN'd into the Fiscal Service network. So you're halfway there. At this point, you'll bring up your browser and you will navigate to the ALEX URL, and the ALEX URL is fedfiscalservice.treasuryecm.gov. And what will happen is that'll get resolved via DNS. ALEX will realize that although you're on the Fiscal Service network, you're not actually authenticated yet to the ALEX system. And so what it'll do is it'll redirect you to the single sign-on page, and that's the screenshot that you see on the left there. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click on that icon that says PIV right there on the left. And when you do that, you'll get a pop-up again to select your certificate. So you'll select the one for client authentication. You'll provide your PIN. In a couple of seconds, you'll get authenticated, and then ultimately you will see the main ALEX page, which is what's shown in the graphic on the right. And at that point, you know you've successfully connected to ALEX. Now, connecting to ALEX, steps 1 through 7 really just gets you to the front door. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, there's more information that's actually stored that's specific to an AC area in the AC area subsites. And so in order to get access to those sites, you're going to need to proceed to step 8. You're going to need to request access to those sites by contacting your AC area to ask for sponsorship. And again, part of the reason for that is, you know, that will encourage discussions with fiscals. Fiscal will figure out if that's actually access you need. If they deem that it is access that you need, then your AC area will be contacting their what's called the AC content manager for that given AC area. And that content manager will submit a service request that will get routed to the Fiscal Service ECM team, and ultimately is the ECM team that will ultimately grant access to you. Now, on the graphic on the right, again, bring you back to the debt management page that's on the public ALEX site. And what I wanted to do was just point out at the very bottom, you'll see a little box that indicates who the content manager is. In this case, it's Daphne Gonzalez. If you were to proceed into any of the other AC area pages, you'll find similarly their content managers listed there as well. All right, so once you've gotten access to ALEX, or if you haven't gotten access to ALEX, there are a couple of known issues. And so what we've seen in some of the pilot testing is that some folks are able to successfully get the VPN client loaded and installed. However, they're unable to successfully navigate or negotiate a connection into the fiscal service environment. And oftentimes that's because they've selected the wrong PIV-I certificate. So again, it's important to make sure you have selected the right one, and you can do that by looking at the details and making sure it says client authentication. Once you're inside ALEX, some folks have noted that not all the ALEX links work, and often that's due to the fact that they don't have the appropriate access. Again, some of those links on ALEX will actually take you to AC area subsites, and access to those obviously will require some additional sponsorship. The other thing that we've noted is that you cannot access ALEX if you're working from home or working remotely. So if you're already VPN'd into the FRB environment through the NE Connect NRAS solution, you can't then use the F5 VPN client. Our FRB security policy does not allow chaining of VPN sessions. And so you're going to need to be on the bank network, either directly jacked in or on Elmo. Otherwise, if you are working from home and you have the Cisco Virtual Office or CVO, that's also a suitable solution. And the other thing that we've noted are an issue too, particularly when communicating with Fiscal Service, is the URL that the Federal Reserve uses for ALEX starts with fedfiscalservice.treasuryecm.gov. However, for Fiscal Service users, their URL for ALEX lacks that Fed prefix. And so if you're exchanging links with Fiscal Service, that's, again, something to remember, and vice versa. If they're sending you links, then you want to make sure that there is the Fed prefix so that you can actually get to it. All right, so in terms of next steps, and again, the policy has recently, became effective at the beginning of this month. The steps for ALEX we've outlined here, so obviously this is a new process for everyone. The TRSO has been working with Fiscal Service as well as with the national IT partners to make sure that they understand their roles in supporting this new service. And so, at least initially for August, we are asking business lines to really prioritize access to ALEX for their staff handling the SBU High. At least kind of start with those individuals. And then, later in about a month or two, they could start evaluating access for broader collaboration for fiscal service. So having a platform for collaboration has been a long desired capability from many of the business lines. Again, a lot of communications happen via email, but email is fairly imperfect. So a lot of areas have asked for a platform where they could store and have one source document repository. And so ALEX can certainly be that repository for many business lines. And so that's available. And then the TRSO is also working right now with Fiscal Service to ask them to provide more information for actually how to store and communicate SBU High using ALEX. So, we've gone through the steps for getting access to ALEX. We are asking for just a little bit more clarification in how to use it in the context of email. Again, to make sure that we have kind of a standard process across kind of the AC areas. Other things that are also happening on the national IT and the fiscal service side as it relates to ALEX is that both organizations are also evaluating additional platforms and capabilities for external collaboration. So there have been discussions and continuing discussions, for example, in linking our two Skypes together to provide instant messaging at some point. Looking at schedules and projects that are already in train, it looks likely that interorganizational Skype between the Federal Reserve and Fiscal Service won't occur any sooner than 2017. But obviously, as more information becomes available, we'll let folks know. And then at a system level, the FRB has also, through the auspices of the GLC, have kicked off an external collaboration program that is looking at a number of tools that would enable the FRB to communicate and collaborate better with external entities, including Treasury, it could be other regulatory bodies. And so, one of the things, obviously, that I think a lot of people working with Treasury Services would be interested in is webinar capabilities. So right now, for those of you that have been on webinars with Fiscal Service, oftentimes there are a lot of technical difficulties in making that connection work. Within the Federal Reserve, we use live meeting. That doesn't work very well at Fiscal Service. They're unable to run the plugin. Fiscal Service uses webinar capabilities offered through their Avaya system. The Avaya system plugins don't work very well on FRB laptops and vice versa. So there's often issues encountered when trying to establish webinars with Fiscal Service. So one of the things that this collaboration program is looking at is a new webinar capability and one that would work with Treasury. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. And so at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions if anybody has any.
The conference is no longer in lecture mode.
Hi, Tony. This is Trevor O'Hara at FRBKC. I have a quick question for you. So we're currently using Lotus Notes database, and as we move away from that, we were told that there might be some opportunity for bulk import of files. Can you elaborate on that, or have you heard anything more on that about if we can move things just from Fiscal Service Server to the ALEX SharePoint site, if that's a possibility, or kind of where we're going to go with that?
Yeah, I've heard discussions kind of along those lines in terms of the migration. Obviously, there's a lot of material and content that your teams have kind of put together over the years. I think the best point of contact for that in terms of whether bulk imports is possible is Jeff Herzl. So I can provide you that contact information, but Jeff Herzl is actually the manager in charge of the Fiscal Service ECM team. His team is actually responsible for the operation and management of ALEX. So I think he could be able to, in the position to provide, I think, more insight in terms of whether or not bulk import could work.
Thank you for that.
Yep, absolutely.
Hey, Tony, this is Chris Pfeiffer in St. Louis. For that external collaboration program, the webinar piece that you talked about last, do you have a target in mind, and have you found anything that seems to work also well with the agencies?
Yeah, so right now that program is actually just kicked off, and in fact they're creating a charter. So the GLC has circulated a charter, and I think they're kind of working on a time frame. That project, particularly for webinars, should kick off this year. At this point, I don't have a firm timeline as to kind of their projected end date in terms of selecting a vendor or a product. But once we get more information, we can certainly make that known.
That sounds good. I think if there's tools that seem to work better collectively, that'd be great to know. Thanks for doing that, too.
Yep, absolutely. And one thing to note, too, again, because having a webinar that works basically between the two organizations is so essential. What some users have found is if you have Mozilla installed on your FRB laptop, sometimes Mozilla will work with the Avaya plugin. Internet IE won't, but Mozilla will.
Great, thanks.
Yep. All right. Any other questions?
Tony, this is Trevor again at FRBKC. Just something I guess I wanted to make you aware of too, and see if we can fill any gaps. We're currently undergoing SANA testing on multiple different projects here, and now that we're no longer able to send via Zixmail with the new policy, we're having to do everything by hand delivery. Has that been discussed at all? Maybe trying to find a solution in the meanwhile before ALEX gets fixed or anything like that, or gets going.
Yeah, so I think there has been some discussion in terms of what to do, because obviously hand delivery is not very efficient, right? And I don't know if you're part of so there are a FSMA work group that the TRSO hosts. And I believe the calls right now are scheduled on a monthly basis. And so I think a lot of these types of issues are brought up there as well in terms of what are the appropriate workarounds. What's nice about those work group calls is it often includes folks from Stacey Cahill's group. Individuals actually that are, part of her, SANA team. And so I think they'll be able to provide, a little bit more details in terms of potential workarounds. What we have heard recently, too, because, again, it's an issue, right, is that Fiscal Service is also looking into some Dropbox type capabilities. And so we have asked for more information on that. So if that's a capability that we in the FRB can leverage, for example, on some of these SANAs, that would be very helpful. So as soon as we get some more information there, we'll pass that on. But in the meantime, I can put you in contact with that fiscal or that FSMA work group.
Thank you. Is that Mark? I forget his last name now.
Yeah, Mark Parker.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll contact him and see what information I can get.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm not hearing any additional questions, but certainly if you have questions a little bit later, or as you go through the steps of obtaining ALEX access, and you'd like to bounce some questions off of me, certainly feel free to reach out to me, email or give me a call. I'll be happy to help answer your questions. All right. If there are no further questions, again, appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks very much.
Bye.